We're having a conversation about consent for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Australian government's campaign Consent Can't Wait is out and about. You can find the website, which we will link to in the show notes, literally consent.gov.au. I'm an ambassador for the Consent Can't Wait campaign and have recorded a whole bunch of commercials that you'll be seeing around the place. Consent Can't Wait. It's a really important conversation. Most people agree that consent is key to healthy sexual experiences, but a lot of people struggle to understand what consent means. I know we think we know what's going on, but there's much more to consent than what most people know. So today, a conversation about the nuances of consent and specifically how we can raise these important issues with our children, with the kids and teenagers in our lives. And we're going to go through stage by stage, Kylie. So you guide us from stage to stage, and I'll add the main ideas. And I'm sure you'll have plenty to say because you've helped me to raise, in fact, primarily you've raised our 6 daughters. Where do you want to start? I guess at the beginning?
Well, let's start with 0 to 5. This is, in my mind, this is a little bit of a grey area when it comes to consent.
What do you mean by grey area?
I think that there is definitely a wide perception that as young children that it's okay to kiss and cuddle and all of those things because they're gorgeous, right? Pinch their cheeks.
Yeah, not just that, but if you listen to the old folks talkback radio, what you'll often hear is people getting upset when conversations around this come up. They're like, they're my grandkids. I'll kiss them and cuddle them if I want.
Yeah.
So I guess the easiest way that I would talk about this is consent starts at the beginning with conversations around body safety and what consent is and boundaries. The other one that always gets people upset is the whole nappy changing thing or the tickling kids or roughhousing with kids, that sort of thing. So let's go through each of those. First off, I want to start with tickling and roughhousing because this one really gets people up in arms. If the kids are saying stop or don't, then just say, okay, and stop. And what happens, of course, is that the children about 3 seconds later, so long as the tickling and roughhousing was appropriate, or half a second later, they say, again. Like they love it, but sometimes it's just too much. And when we let them know that if they ask us to stop, that we will stop, we're literally teaching them that their voice matters, that they have agency, they have power, and they can choose for themselves what activities they're involved in and what activities they're not involved in. That's the whole idea of teaching consent to children aged 0 to 5. It's not that it's same with changing a nappy, right? The idea that you're supposed to ask your child if you can change their nappy, I don't think that that's useful, especially if your child is pre-verbal.
I was about to say 3 months, 6 months.
That's right. But what you can do is you can describe what you're dodoing and why you're doing it and help them to understand that. And it's the same with bath time, right? Even before consent became a major issue, I always said to the kids, because I used to love bath time and I used to love bathing the kids. I loved scrubbing them with the scourer. That's with the loofah, sorry. Used to love to loofah their back and all that sort of thing. But when it came to their private parts, I'd always say, do you want to wash your private parts or do you want me to? And give them the opportunity to have a voice and have a choice from the age of like 2 or 3 or whatever it was. Why? Well, because I'm their dad and I just don't feel like even though it's appropriate that they be washed there, I always thought they needed to have a voice. And that's the idea of this.
You think we can take it to the extreme?
Yeah, I do. And I think that's why when people do take it to extremes, I think that's why the talkback radio lines light up and all the grandparents get on and say, this is ridiculous and what's the world coming to and back in my day. That's where it becomes unhelpful. But when we have a really sensible approach to it, and that is I'm going to explain to my child what's going on, or to the extent that they can choose, I'm going to give them every opportunity to use their voice and I'll honor that. It's the same with hugging and kissing. This came up with your parents just recently with our youngest, who is now 10, and she just said, I love hugs. I love hugging Nan. She was so enthusiastic about it. She was so excited about it. But your mum, and I'm really impressed by this, your mum has started saying, is it okay if I give you a hug? Like she started asking, and it's not hard to do it. When you look at your grandkids and you say, would you like a hug? And they come running into your arms, you get a pretty clear signal that they're okay with a hug. And that's the idea of consent. It's about letting kids know that they have a voice and that their preferences matter. They should be considered. I actually think that it's the height of arrogance, the height of rudeness, and the height of entitlement when a grandparent says, I don't care if you want a hug or not, you're giving me a hug. Like that's inappropriate. And I'm not trying to sound like a wowser here. It's just by every measure of what consent is about, that's simply inappropriate. And so the people who are doing this on the talkback radio stations and getting upset about it, if they just pause and consider how they feel if someone puts their arms around them without consent, it feels pretty icky. It feels pretty gross.
I know growing up, it wasn't just me and my family, but I was raised in be respectful of adults, and everyone in our circles was deemed family. If they were close friends, they were an auntie or an uncle, because that was a respectful way to talk to them and acknowledge them.
A lot of that comes from that kin-based traditional New Zealand Maori heritage, right? I mean, that's the way family is. Everyone is an auntie or an uncle or a cousin, and
let's face it, they probably are. But.
And when you see them, you're supposed to embrace them and kiss them and do all of those traditional things. That's how it always has been.
But the challenge for me as a young child was most of those people I'd never seen before, or I see once a year. And so the idea of bringing them into my personal space, even as a 5-year-old, it felt wrong. Like it didn't...
Really confronting?
I didn't feel comfortable. You're not my mum. You're not my dad. You're not someone I trust. This is a really tricky space. So for us, as we've raised our children, it has always been an acknowledgement. No one is an auntie and uncle unless they're an auntie or uncle for starters. Right, yeah. But they've never been forced in any way, shape or form to acknowledge them with a hug and a kiss if it's not what they want to do. So if we move forward from our 0 to 5s, we're looking at 6 to maybe 13 to our early teens.
Yeah, primary school age kids. So this is where the consent, I mean, you'll know that with young kids, we're not having conversations about consent and intimacy.
Yeah.
We're simply teaching respect and body boundaries. And if someone says no, it means no, and that kind of thing. It's really basic stuff. I don't think there's anything controversial or provocative about this. I don't understand why people get that upset about it. In terms of primary school, the conversation shifts a little bit, primarily because social networks expand. And so kids they're going to know more people, but there's also the possibility there's going to be conflict. But I want to do this, and my friend wants to do that, and we've got this conflict here. And consent becomes more about social relationships and activity-based conversations and that kind of thing, healthy friendships, and how to just engage respectfully with other people. I think at this point we can start to teach our kids about verbal and nonverbal communication. This is a really powerful way to help kids to communicate consent. I like this. I don't like this. Body language gives us that insight into how someone's feeling. And if we can help kids to tune into what other people are showing, that can be really profoundly useful. I remember speaking with a colleague of mine some years ago who said that when she was about 15 or 16, she was on a bus. She was the only person on the bus. And a guy got on who was probably, I don't know, a young adult, and saw her sitting there, just a girl on her own on the bus, and literally went and sat on the seat beside her, which is it's such a power.
I was about to say that big power play.
Big power play, but if we have the capacity to read other people's body language, like she shrank, she moved as close to the window as she could. I mean, and he sort of what is it when a man spread or whatever?
He clearly didn't care what she thought.
Totally. But the idea is if we can teach people to read one another better and have some empathy around that, not just the skill of reading other people, but the empathy that accompanies that, then we can help them to understand the non-verbal elements of consent as well. Oh, this person's stiffening up. This person's moving away. This person's not making eye contact. This person's looking worried.
This person in voice is saying yes, but everything about their body is screaming no.
Right. And I think that's really what we're looking at here. How can we communicate boundaries effectively? Teaching kids to develop their identity, to develop a voice, to be willing to say no, to think critically about what they see online, to think about who they're talking to, and to engage respectfully. That's, for me, the primary school age sort of stuff.
So this is a really tricky space, this idea of giving our children a voice. For a lot of parents, we just want compliance, right? We want them to do what we ask when we ask them to do it, because that makes our life easy. And I know that that was the kind of home I was raised in.
Yeah.
So when our children reached school age and they started having opinions about things, my parents really were taken back by that.
Like, aren't you going to stamp that out?
Because that's not how I was raised.
Yeah.
And yes, it causes some conflict and contention in your home as you try to navigate the challenge of your children having a voice and telling you they don't want to do something you clearly know, number one, is good for them, and number two, needs to be done in order for the family to function, whatever it is. But I think there is so much power Think about just that friend of yours and being on the bus. What a difference it would have made to her if she knew that she was well within her rights to either ask him to move or to stand up,
Just stand
and
up
move
and move.
away.
Yeah, go sit right next to the bus driver, that kind of thing.
And so for me as a mum of girls, that's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to help my girls recognize and know that their voice matters, number one. And number two, if they have absolute clarity on who they are and who they want to be, then they will have confidence in their ability to speak that when the time comes.
So that's a pretty good segue to move into the adolescence and secondary school age group. Let's talk about teenagers. I've spoken to just too many girls. I've spoken to too many girls who have told me that they've acquiesced, that they've gone along when a boy that they've been with has put pressure on them to engage in any kind of intimacy because they felt like they had to. They felt like they couldn't say no. They felt like this was how they proved that they loved him.
The devastation in this, though, is the girls walk away feeling guilty.
Yeah, the girls are the ones that walk away and they feel like they're dirty or unworthy or that.
Or I said yes, so therefore I deserved what I got.
Right.
It's a devastating place to be.
So if we transition into these adolescent years, we start to talk about romantic relationships. I think this is the most important zone, but it works best if we build a foundation where kids already know that their voice matters and that they're allowed to say no. Critical things here around consent. Number one, you can say yes and then change your mind. If you withdraw consent, then there is no consent. Consent is gone. And these are the things that we've got to talk to our kids about. We've got to talk to them about how if there's any alcohol or other drugs involved and therefore, or there any kind of impairment or a person doesn't have the capacity, then they can't consent. If they don't have the maturity, if they're not old enough, they can't consent. Navigating consent is sometimes just so much more complicated than do I have permission? In fact, permission, the example that I use here when I'm talking to parents about this stuff is the kids now and then will come to me and say, hey, Dad, can I have $50 so that I can go and watch a movie and get some grilled, a burger and some chips? And I don't want to give the kids $50. Like, that's a really expensive night out. But that's how much it costs for a burger and chips and a movie at the local cinema. But eventually I roll my eyes and say, sure, take the $50. Now, is that consent? Really? Like, it's a pretty low bar. And so when and we probably need to talk to our kids again about this because it's been a while. These are not one and done conversations. But if the person that you're with is not going to be excited about what happened tomorrow, then I think that's not consent. I like drawing two circles, a Venn diagram, where they're two overlapping circles.
Yep.
And in one circle, you've got the words, what I want. And in another circle, you've got the words, what they want. And the bit where they overlap is what we want, and that's consent. And if you start to push into another zone, then that ceases to be consent. I just think this is such an important conversation, especially when teenagers are engaged in sending intimate images to one another or going to parties, and there's all those sorts of pressure. So there's so much more we could talk about. This is not a paid advertisement, but I want to refer people to consent.gov.au. Like I said, I am an ambassador for it, and the work that they're doing is really good. It's really smart work. Myself, Chanel Contos is also an ambassador. Dan Principe, who speaks about pornography in schools all around the country, he's also an ambassador. And Chantel Otten is also an ambassador. So it's a pretty power-packed foursome who are really trying to push this consent conversation, and it matters. Consent.gov.au.
So what about families in minority situations?
Yeah, actually, there's a bunch of resources that they've got there as well, and I think it's really great. There's some stuff for First Nations families, which is brilliant. If English is not your first language, there's some really good resources for people who just need stuff super simple, and they've done a really smart job of that. And there's also some resources for LGBTQ plus populations as well. Interestingly, consent is, in some circumstances, it's navigated brilliantly. In other circumstances, it's absolutely atrocious. And so there's really great resources for all of those as well. Let's wrap this up with some final tips, Kylie. Have the conversations from the start. Focus on ethics and empathy and rights and bodily autonomy. I mean, that's at the very crux of it. And if we start those conversations at the very beginning, our kids at least know and understand what we're talking about here.
Give your kids a voice.
Give them a voice, yeah.
From the beginning.
And I think if you've got daughters, given that we've got 6 of them, teaching them that they do not owe anything to anybody, especially once they get into adolescence and start to have an interest in boyfriends, girlfriends, partners, whatever, they need to know you don't owe them anything. You don't have to say yes to anything. There's no obligation. Just because they bought you dinner, or just because they bought you a milkshake, or just because they bought you a $2 Slurpee from 7-Eleven doesn't mean that you owe them anything at all. You're welcome to say no every single day until you're ready to start to say yes.
And they're whole just because they're them. Like they're not waiting for Prince Charming to come and sweep them off their feet. They are whole and worthy right now.
Yeah.
As themselves.
And the last thing I'd say is this: education and conversations about consent are not going to stop the sexual violence challenges that we have in Australia all on its own. We do need more than that. So we need to have these conversations around other areas like alcohol and other drugs. And if you're raising boys, it really, I mean, girls are the brake, boys are the accelerator, and we've got to teach them that that's the way it's always been, and it shouldn't always be that way, that they're not to be the accelerator. And if they are going to be the accelerator, they're not allowed to. The whole idea is you don't just put the pedal to the metal. It's not about flooring it. It's about having a really, really healthy kind of control and sticking to the speed limit, metaphorically speaking, letting them know as well that the pain of regret as a perpetrator will probably be pretty substantial. Imagine what it's going to be like when you've got daughters, how you're going to feel, how protective you'll feel, and how would you feel if your daughter was dating a guy like you? Would you be excited because you know they're going to be safe, or would you be terrified because you know what you are like? So I think that those kinds of conversations matter. I'm not calling boys perpetrators, by the way, and I'm not calling girls victims, but I think that if we can have these conversations, we're going to have fewer perpetrators and fewer victims, and that's a good thing all round. So that's the conversation. Bit of a long one, bit of a heavy one. More details at consent.gov.au. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rawlin from Bridge Media. All the details that you need for more on this topic are at consent.gov.au. And if you'd like more information about making your family happier, visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.